Okay, hello. I hope this is working. I had a little couple of minutes late here. Had some connection issue, but I think we're okay now. Can you let me know in the chat if you can see me and hear me? It looks good from this end, but I'm not 100% positive. Okay, good. Okay, I'm getting some feedback that we're okay. We're ready to go. Okay, so we're continuing on with our look at the Vissudhimagga, Path of Purification. And we've come up to chapter 14, which is titled The Aggregates. This is beginning of a kind of intermediate section in the book. I spoke about the overall structure of the Vissudhimagga in the first talk. It follows, it's a very tightly structured work, and it follows the stages of insight. And what we've dealt with so far comes under the headings of purification of mind, and what's the other one? Let me here have a look. What's the purification of conduct, purification of mind? So that's sila and samadhi. And that took us to the end of chapter 13. And the actual insight stages begin with chapter 18. There are a few chapters here beginning with 14 through 17 that are a kind of intermission. They're outside of that structure, and they lay some of the kind of groundwork. And they come under the heading of Panya, wisdom. This particular chapter 14 is one of the more difficult chapters. It's very technical, but it's also one of the most important in regards to the study of the Buddhist teaching. This is a very good overview of categories derived from Abhidhamma. This chapter 14 of Vissudhimagga plus Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the Abhidhamma Sangaha, the manual of Abhidhamma, those two together will give you the basic framework of Abhidhamma. In fact, this chapter might be very difficult to understand in places if you have not previously looked at the manual of Abhidhamma. I think Buddhaghosa generally assumes that his readers have a certain cursory knowledge of Abhidhamma. This chapter is deals first of all with what the translator Nyanamoli, he's the English translator of this book, he calls understanding, which is panya, which is usually translated wisdom. So this is another feature of that can be difficult for people sometimes to approach the English version of the Vissudhimagga, in that some of the terms are not translated in the standard way, so you might miss that. It begins with a kind of introduction to the chapter. He analyzes the meaning of what he calls understanding, or what is generally translated wisdom. and he goes through that in a number of different, approaches it from a number of different angles. There's one kind of interesting simile or metaphor to explain the difference between perception, consciousness, and wisdom. He says if there's a coin, a child without discretion knows merely the coins are figured and ornamented, long, square, or round. He does not know they are reckoned as valuable for human use and enjoyment. So that's like consciousness, or no, that's like perception. The first sensation of an object to the mind. Then consciousness is like an adult villager seeing the coin, and he knows that it's useful for use and enjoyment, but he doesn't have any doesn't understand any fine distinctions about it. That's like consciousness. But wisdom is like a money changer who knows if it is genuine, if it is false, if it is half value, and he knows this by looking at it, listening to the sound of it when struck, smelling it, tasting it, weighing it in his hand. He knows it is made in a certain village or town, or on a certain mountain, or by a certain master. All this may be understood as illustration. So generally, wisdom is defined as seeing things according to reality. It analyzes it. There's several pages of analyzing wisdom of different kinds and from different angles. One of the points that comes up in here is kind of interesting. He talks about wisdom as knowledge about a language, and he makes the claim. This is something that occurs in the commentaries as well. The idea that the Magadhan, or what we would call Pali, is the natural organic language, and that the meaning is inherent in the words. It's kind of from a linguistic point of view, it's kind of an absurd claim, but because we know that Pali was a Prakrit, meaning a derivative of Sanskrit, so it's definitely not the root language if it has an ancestor. And all this goes on for several pages, and looking at the wisdom from different angles. But all this is by way of introduction to the theme of the chapter, which is the 5 aggregates. Now, these next few chapters are analyzing different categories of Dhamma, and this one deals with the aggregates, the Khanda, the 5 Khanda. In terms of materiality, the body, or Rupa Khanda, the main emphasis is on the material form of a living being, rather than kind of physics or analysis of matter, which you can find elsewhere in Abhidhamma, analysis of matter, but we don't really get that here. What we get is analysis of different kinds of materiality in the body. And there is a list of 21 types of what are called derived materiality. Ultimate materiality of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water. But in a living body, there are various derived or secondary manifestations of matter or body. These are briefly the sense organs, sense objects, and then the two, femininity faculty and masculinity faculty. All beings in the sense desire realm are divided into male and female, and they have as one of the material qualities, they either are imbued with masculinity or femininity. The life faculty, which is that power or faculty of living things that inanimate objects lack. Then the heart basis. This is the material basis for mind, or it is to be found in dependence on the blood inside the heart. So this was again something that you don't find this idea in the suttas, but in the commentaries, it's a general idea that the heart is the seat of the mind, the physical connection to the mind. We spoke about that previously in in terms of the supernormal powers. The first preliminary version of reading other people's minds is to see the color of the blood in their heart. And this tells you their mental state. Then there's two intimations, bodily and verbal. It's called intimations, which just means a volitional activity of the body and mind, of the body and speech. Space element, and which is present in the body in the hollows and orifices of the body. It defines the form of the body. Lightness of matter, malleability of matter, wieldiness of matter, growth of matter, continuity of matter. So these are 21. And each one has a bit of a description. So this is how Buddhaghosa analyzes, in the first place, analyzes physical form. There's a big overlap here. We're going to come in a subsequent chapter to talk about what are called the faculties, and there's a big overlap in these lists. They're very similar. Then there's an aging of matter, impermanence of matter, physical nutriment, the nutritive essence that's found in food and that sustains life. So there's 24 ways that the matter is analyzed in this, in terms of derived matter or matter in a physical form. And then we get to the consciousness aggregate, vijnana. And this is a very technical section. I would say it's probably difficult at first approach. What we have as a study aid in the back of the book, there are diagrams, tables that I don't know how well you can see that. There's tables that analyze the cross references of these different forms of consciousness. There, in the Abhidhamma, consciousness or chitta is considered to be a momentary of occurrence, and there are 80, and it's classified into 89 kinds. And these are cross-referenced in different ways, which leads to the best way of visualizing or understanding this teaching is to have a diagram or a chart. either one somebody else has made, or it can actually be a very useful study aid to try and make your own chart from the text, cross-referencing these different forms of consciousness. The main divisions that cut across each other, one is by plane. Consciousness can be either the sense desire realm or plane, bhumi, or of the realm of form, that is the Brahma realms, or for a human being, the states of jhana, and the arupa bhumi, or the formless states, either the formless abidings or formless rebirth, and nibbana. So there's 4 planes of consciousness. Cutting across these are numerous functional distinctions, the most important of which is between the difference between a volitional moment and a consciousness moment that is a result. So there's like karma effective and karma resultant, and then there's a third category that are functional, that don't fit in, they neither make karma nor receive karma, but they just perform a function in the cognizing of objects. Then there are still other ways of categorizing them, as for the karmic active moments, they can be either classified as skillful or unskillful, and the karma resultant moments are either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And there are even finer gradations and degrees in all of this. One of the important distinctions, and I'll make it before I get into that, I'll make a general remark that the real benefit of this kind of Abhidhamma approach is found in the details. Often, in the fine details, there's some important teachings, important truths emerge. One of these is in the analysis of the different kinds of karma effective. When you make karma, either for good or for ill, it can be divided into different categories that affect the strength of the karma. One of these is whether it's prompted or unprompted, sankata or asankata, meaning the amount of volition involved. If you do something totally of your own free will and spontaneously, it has more karmic effect than if you've been prompted, that is, talked into it or cajoled. And there's very little karma made if you're forced to do something. So it's a matter of degrees. Another one is whether the mind moment is associated with joy or neutral or ill will, like the feeling tone of the moment. And the interesting thing here is that association with joy, if anything is done with the joyful heart, it has a more powerful karma. And this works both for good and for evil. If you do some good, generous deed and you're joyful in the heart while you're doing it, then it's more powerful. You make better karma than if you do it reluctantly or with a bit of a rumbling mind. But likewise, on the opposite end, if you do some act of evil, some cruelty or selfishness, and you take joy and relish in it, it's worse than if you just do it with a neutral mind. And the third and last one of these, of this particular type of category, is whether the action is associated or disassociated with knowledge. Whether you know what you're doing, you understand things, then that tends towards the good. It makes a good act more powerful, and it makes an evil act less harmful than if it's done with the wrong view. Now this can be, you have to think about this one because it can be sort of counterintuitive. If people can do cruel acts and think they're doing good, they maybe have some ideology that excuses what they're doing. According to this teaching, that actually makes it worse, because besides the fact of doing a wrong deed, they also have wrong view, and that intensifies it. So there's quite a bit of analysis of these 89 kinds. And one of the things that the translator has inserted into the text as a study aid that can come in handy is that each of these, he gives a number to each of these 89 kinds of consciousness, so they can be, because they'll come up again in cross-referenced with the mental formations and the feelings, and it makes it easier to identify, especially if you're also using the diagrams at the back of the book. It makes it easier to identify. So each of these 89 is given a number. This is a device of the translator, of Nyanamoli. Then he analyzes consciousness from a different angle in terms of, he calls it the 14 modes of consciousness. And in this particular text, it's not really made explicit. This is where a look at the Manual of Abhidhamma will help explain this better. These 14 modes refer to what's called in Pali the Chittavritti, the sequence of consciousness. This is an analysis of the way we cognize an object, that consciousness goes through a number of transformations during a single act of cognition, and depending on various other limiting factors, it may be anywhere up to 14 moments to fully cognize a single object. And as I said, there's a more clear explanation of this particular teaching in the Manual of Abhidhamma. But here it's one of the things that's done here is this is where these numbers come in to use, because he identifies which kinds of consciousness can occur in which mode by cross-referencing them with the numbers. The sections on the feeling and perception aggregates are much shorter. It doesn't go into such a detail. In the terms of the feeling aggregate, there is some reference to which kinds of feeling can occur with which kinds of consciousness. This is one of the features of Abhidhamma, is a lot of cross-referencing. So various kinds of consciousness can occur with joy, other ones can only occur with equanimity, and so on. And as I said, that sometimes some detail will spring out and have a valuable teaching. One of these is, if you study these cross references, the consciousness of mental suffering, domanassa, or unhappiness. Let's say best translation is going to be unhappiness. Feeling tones divided into either bodily painful sensation or mental painful sensation. So domanassa, which he translates as grief, only occurs with unprofitable consciousness or unskillful consciousness, which is an interesting observation, that it's never a skillful consciousness that feels unhappiness. And finally, the last category is, of course, the mental formations, and there's given in terms of which ones are skillful, unskillful, and so on. There's altogether 50 of them. And there again, cross-reference with the kinds of consciousness. There's a couple of things to note about this this section. One of them that is that some of the states are called what he calls in translation the or whatever states. That's in Pali, Yevapanaka. It just sort of means etc. And this is and I remember on my first reading many years ago of Vissudhimagga, this confused me. What is it or whatever state? It's not really explained, but what it is that this list of sankharas is derived from the canonical Abhidhamma text, the Dhammasangini, and in the Dhammasangini, the list of sankharas is not closed; it's left open, so it'll say or whatever other states may arise from time to time. Whereas in the commentarial period, they tried to close every opening and cross every T, dot every I. This is one of the kind of characteristics of the commentaries. So they added a number of states to close the list. The list was considered closed and complete, and they called these the or whatever states. Now, one practical use for study in this section is all these various states, beginning with contact, volition, applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, energy, life, concentration, faith, etc. And there's altogether 50 of them. Each one is defined usually in terms of the fourfold analysis that the Vissudhimagga and the commentaries commonly use to define terms, that is in terms of manifestation, function, characteristic, and proximate cause. So this is a very useful reference to get a brief definition of each of any term in the Buddhist teaching. A lot of these terms come up in other contexts. Now here we have to be somewhat cognizant of the use of language, because as I've mentioned several times before, sometimes translations are not what you expect, but you do have it in this book is very well structured. You do have at the back of the book an index and a glossary. The index is in English, and it'll include the Pali original in brackets, and the glossary is the reverse of that. It's it has the Pali words with the English translation. So between the two of them, you can figure out what these various terms are in Pali, and maybe get an idea of what if it differs from the standard translation, what the other translation might be. And this is a very long section because it has a paragraph for each of the 50 aggregates of the sankharas. Then there's some after that there's several pages of kind of meta-analysis, looking at the aggregates in different ways. For example, according to order, distinction, neither less nor more, likewise as the simile, etc. Which is another heuristic method of the Vissudhimagga, is to analyze things from different angles, and often in terms of what are called dyads and triads. dualities or trinities. An example of a duality might be mundane and supermundane. Trinity might be pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's an overview of this chapter. And if you're gonna take any make any effort to understand this chapter, which is not admittedly not very easy at first look, it yields a lot of important teachings. It's a very good summary of a lot of the Dhamma. And as I said, I would recommend, if you seriously want to study it, to first of all have a look at the Manual of Abhidhamma, particularly the sections on consciousness and sankharas. And it can be actually a very useful exercise going through this material to make your own tables, cross-reference them according to your own study of the text. I'll just conclude with a brief note. There was an academic article, which I'm really sorry I can't remember the title or the author. I read it some time ago, but he was making an argument that Abhidhamma was a fairly late development, and it only occurred when writing became common in India, which would have been at the earliest about 100 BC, and probably more like 100 AD, because it's not really possible to grasp with the mind, or certainly not easy to grasp with the mind, Abhidhamma in a strictly linear fashion, as would be necessary in verbal recitation. You pretty much have to cross-reference things so your mind can grasp them in at least two dimensions. So that's why you'll see in many, not just in this book, but in many books of Abhidhamma, you'll see tables cross-referencing things as an aid to understanding. Okay, so next week, continuing on this section on wisdom, and there's a look at the bases and elements, ayatanas and dhatus. So it's another, that is, that the bases are to do with the senses, and the elements are the four physical elements, also consciousness and space, and there's also some other categories that get called elements. So we'll go into all that next week, and thank you for staying through this presentation, and I'll go on now and see what I can do with questions in the chat. Mudita asks, Ajahn, can you actually see the interplay of the mental khandhas, such as Vijnana, Sankhara, Sanya, without samadhi, through dry insight, or see it only emerging from deep jhana? Well, jhana is in terms of insight, jhana is an aid to calming the mind and making insight more possible, but it's not strictly necessary. That it is insight that will let you see and distinguish the actions of the different khandhas. There are a great many psychic powers in the suttas and commentaries. Is there an example of telekinesis? The telekinesis, moving objects with the mind. Well, there is some story in one of the commentarial stories about the Buddha creating chariots to move his group somewhere. They wanted to go someplace quickly, and he created this string of chariots, and by the power of his mind, he rose them in the air and they flew through the air. Second part of the same. If two people practice exactly the same way, is it possible one person will get enlightened and the other not? Yeah, that would be possible because they will have different karma, different previous development of paramis. What are your thoughts on the story that Ajahn Mun saying the Buddha and other archons gave him advice, implying they exist somewhere? How is that possible after reaching Nibbana? Yeah, that is a controversial passage for sure. For those who haven't read Ajahn Mun's biography, he speaks about a incident in his deep meditation where the Buddha and a sangha of his disciples appeared before him, and gave him teachings and discourse with him, and he claims this was not just his imagination; it was actually the Buddha manifesting. This passage upsets strict orthodoxy in Theravada. It does sound kind of a Mahayana sort of approach, and the Ajahn Mun's own explanation is that once the Buddhists pass into parinibbana, they're still able to re-manifest out of that emptiness if they have a reason to or desire to. One of the curiosities of that passage from my reading of it was that when Ajahn Mun had a chance to ask the Buddha a question, instead of asking him of some profound question of philosophical Dhamma, he asked him something about the order of precedence and Vinaya. It struck me as very Thai, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, next question. If a new set of 5 aggregates are made when someone is reborn, how does the stream of consciousness move on to the new rupa? How does someone remember past lives? Well, the idea is that the consciousness is remade in each moment, but there's a continuity of cause and effect. There's no continuity of substance, but there's a chain of causality. They're linked by cause and effect. So if someone's not fully enlightened, when they die, they have karma and desire still outstanding that generates a new life, and consciousness arises again in the sequence, but it's not like it moves. There's nothing that moves or persists, but it arises again in the same sequence, karmically determined by everything that went before. Monte, would you recommend a Western student ordained in Thailand or culture? Sorry, I skipped a whole line there. Would you recommend that a Western student ordained in Thailand or Sri Lanka due to the strong supporting Buddhist culture, or in the West due to personal cultural similarity? I think you go where you've got an opportunity to go. My choice when I ordained was to go to Thailand because it's I really wanted to get, the traditional root, or get close to the root teaching, and there was still is a monastery, Wat Pah Nanachat, where it's very traditional. It's a branch of Ajahn Chah's tradition that was set up for Westerners or foreigners. So the teachings are all in English, so I didn't have to learn Thai immediately. I could study in English. Sri Lanka, there's a lot of English speaking anyway because it's in the educational system. I would say it's a matter of personal opportunity more than anything else. If you have the opportunity to go to Asia and ordain in Buddhist country, I think there's a lot of advantages to that. But we now have some really excellent traditional monasteries in Western countries, which didn't exist in my early days. Would it be possible for a wheel turner and a Buddha to be born in the same era and world system? What would happen if they met face to face? There are some indications in the commentaries that this is not possible, but there's also a contradiction to that elsewhere that says that when Meitya Buddha comes, there will also be a wheel-turning monarch in the world at the same time. I think, if anything, it must be an extremely rare occurrence that two Mahaparisas of different kinds arise at the same time in the same world system. I've seen the aggregate of mental formations also called volitional formations. Mental formations sound more inclusive. Yes, when it's called volitional formations, it's really referring to only a subset of the whole mental formations. The sankharas, some of the sankharas are karma, as we said with the chitta. Some are volitional and some are resultant. So volitional formations are what are meant in the dependent origination. The second item of dependent origination is sankharas, and the gloss that's right in the sutta. It's not a commentarial gloss. It's right in the sutta. It says, these are the volitional formations. So this is like mental formations that make karma. It's a subset of the whole. So you're right. Mental formations is more inclusive. Sariputta used to get his disciples to do contemplation of feelings, reach nibbana. How do you do this in meditation? Is this a body scan? Strictly speaking, Vedana is a mental aggregate. It's not a physical aggregate. If you're doing a body scan, you're being aware of sensations in the body. It's the mental reaction to them as being pleasant or unpleasant that is technically Vedana. And the contemplation of Vedana is to be aware of one's reaction to phenomena. This is pleasant, this is unpleasant, this is neutral. What does it feel like to reach Sotapanna, and how does one know for sure they attained it? To know whether you've reached Sotapanna or not, the best advice is to examine the mind for the first three fetters. So that would mean, first of all, learning what those fetters actually refer to, because the English translations are very misleading. I've given talks on this topic. You can find, I just a week or two ago, I did a talk on the 10 samyojanas and the stages of enlightenment. You can find it on our website if you want to get into it. You have to attain all 4 rupa jhanas before experiencing arupa jhana. How can we make a donation to give dana if we were in a different city? Go on our website. There's a donation page. There's different options of ways to do it. The web page is easy to find. It's arrowriver.ca. Do you have to attain all 4 rupa jhanas before experiencing arupa jhana? I think there's a school of thought that says you do, and I think that would be the book we're studying now. Buddha Bosa tended to, I think, lean that way. But there's also the idea that one can experience the formless states without necessarily going through the form jhanas first. And there are different ways of approaching the formlessness. One is using kasina meditation and then removing the kasina. Another is doing metta meditation and extending meta to the whole universe, and then removing the meta and just remaining in boundless space. A third way is a way that's done by abstracting away from experience different layers of perception. So, and simplifying the perception down. This is in the Chilasunyata Sutta. It talks about this. And none of those really require being in fourth jhana. Okay, getting close to the end, I think. Let's see what one or two more. What did Heraclitus mean when he said it rests by changing in reference to flux? How is this relevant to Praticca Samuppada? Heraclitus was the Greek philosopher, and he's most famous for saying you can't step into the same river twice. We don't really have a good idea of his complete teachings. None of his works survive, if he ever had any. But what we have are fragments of his teaching that other people quote. It seems like the basis of his teaching was impermanence, that everything is constantly changing, nothing persists for even a moment, which is very much like the Buddhist Abhidhamma. Okay, so I think we'll call it for now, and if you want to read ahead for next week's session, have a look at chapter 15. It's shorter than this one. This chapter 14 may be the most difficult chapter in the book. Not that the rest are a piece of cake, but there we go. Okay, so we'll leave that for now, and